Hello, welcome back to my channel. The trend is changing. Fashion designing is upgrading and you need to level up and upgrade as well. Are you still dividing your hip measurement by 4? Look at how I'm looking at it. In 2022, you are still dividing your hip measurement by 4. Please though, I'm here to change the narrative, alright? So you know that African ladies, we are so blessed that we have a very flat front and the behind is, God did a very wonderful work at the behind of most African ladies. He gave us that sculpture, okay, at the back. So you would agree with me that a lot of us African ladies, please, I'm not one of them, we have a protruded backside. Meanwhile, the front is really flat, so you cannot allocate the same figure or equal figure to the front and the back. It is wrong, totally wrong. Okay, so the back should take more figures than the front. Remember, we divide our hip by 4, and I'm saying that is totally wrong, except in the case of where the person is really moderate, the person doesn't really have so much bump and the difference between her waist and her hip is not so much, or the hip and the waist is the same thing. You can divide your hip by 4. But now a lot of ladies are endowed, and even when God did not give them, the doctors are giving them, so you cannot now go and compress what they have paid so much money to get. So if you share the hip by 4, okay, if you give it equally, you're going to compress that God-given sculpture, okay, that thing that God has given them at the back. You're going to compress it, and the bump is going to be restricted in the skirt or in the dress. So you need to use the hip allocation method to sculpture the back, to cup it, okay, to give it that original shape that the Almighty has given. Oh, hallelujah, my daughter of Zion. My name is Nani, and I'm a Nigerian fashion designer and YouTuber based in Owerri, Imo State. So let's get right into the video for today. Hello guys, welcome back. So remember, we're talking about hip allocation and your dartless front bodies. Okay, so I'm going to be using the following measurements. Okay, so I'll be using waist 42, hip 44, waist to hip of 9 inches, then length of, I could use about 26 inches. Okay, I could use 26 inches, or I want to make it a high waist, so I can make it 28 inches. Okay, so these are the measurements that I need, right? So now we're talking about hip allocation, right? So what this means is that you're not going to divide your hip by 4. Please do not make that it's not a mistake. It works for a lot of us, okay? It has worked for me for a very long time, but along the line I realized that it doesn't work for everybody. People with big back sides, dividing the hip measurement by 4 constricts the hip. Okay, I've explained that in the intro. So the formula to go about this is for the front, okay, for the front skirt, you're going to divide your hip circumference, that's this hip circumference. You're going to measure your overall hip, okay? So hip divided by 2 minus 1 or 1.5. Okay, so this is how to derive your front hip. Now my hip is 44, divided by 2 is 22. Okay, so that's what I would have used for the front and the back, but the back is bigger than the front, so I'm going to subtract 1 inch. You're going to use 1.5 if the difference between your waist and your hip is about 8 inches, 7 inches, 6 inches, when the hip is really bigger than the waist. But in my case, the difference between my waist and my hip is just 2 inches, so I can't use 1.5 because it will be too much. So if the difference between your waist and your hip is from 5 inches to 1 inch, or there is no difference, you don't need to minus 1.5. okay, and if there is no difference between your waist and your hip, you don't need to do this with hip allocation method. So the hip is 44 divided by 2, that's 22, minus 1 is 21. Okay, so I'll be using 21 from my front hip. All right, so back skirt is hip divided by 2 plus 1 or 1.5. Okay, so the hip is 44 divided by 2 is 22 plus 1 is 23. So 23 is the value I'll be using for my back hip, and 21 is the value I'll be using for my front hip. You need to keep these two values, okay, so that you'd work with them when you need to. So if I add 21 and 23, it will still give me 44, which is my original hip measurement. So remember I said I want a skirt length of 28 inches. I want a skirt length of 28 inches. So what I have here on the pattern is 27. Besides, I'll be needing my band of 2 inches. So I'm going to place 2 inches away from my pattern. Okay, I'm going to place 2 inches away from my pattern because, like I said, I want a band height of 2 inches. So my waist to hip is 9 inches. I'll place 9 inches here. My length is 28. Okay, so I'll place 28 here. I'll just use the length. This is 28. Okay, then I'll add my hemming allowance to my fabric. Right, so I'm just going to connect this in a straight line. All right, so this is your hip line. Now what you can also do is to come down by 1/2 inch, because you're going to need 1/2 inch to attach the skirt to the band. So you can add 1/2 inch to your hip length, and you can also add additional 1/2 inch to the length of your skirt, okay, because of the band that will be attaching to it. So this becomes my hip. And this becomes the length of my skirt, where this is the waist. Okay, so I'm going to start drafting. This is my center front. You're drafting the front pattern now. So my waist is 44. Okay, you're not going to divide the waist by we're not going to divide the waist by 2, okay, because the front waist and the back waist is the same thing. Most times it's not the same thing for people that have tummy, but that can be ignored. Okay, for some of us that have big tummy, you cannot start doing, okay, let me divide the waist by 2. No, that one can be overlooked. The concentration is on the hip. Okay, so the hip divided, the waist divided by 4 is 10.5. Okay, the hip is 42 divided by 4 is 10.5. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 10.5. You can add your 2 inches seam allowance, okay, or this is a pattern, you can decide not to add your seam allowance and then add it to your fabric. Now this is the hip. Okay, so on the hip, remember we have divided the front hip, which is 21. Okay, 21 is the front hip, 21 is the front hip. Now because this pattern is supposed to be on fold, this pattern is supposed to be on fold for your skirt, I'm going to divide 21 by 2. Okay, 21 divided by 2 gave me 10.5, the same figure as my waist. So this is 10.5 plus my 2 inches seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to connect that. It's actually on the straight line, it's the same thing. Okay, so you can see at this point it's straight because the front does not have so much going on in front. The main business is at the back. Right, so on the length of your skirt, I've also told us in my previous video that to derive your round knee measurement, you need to subtract 6 inches from your hip. Okay, so like I said, the hip I'm working with is 44 minus 6, that gave me 38 inches. So I'm going to divide 38 by 4, okay, on the knee line. So 38 divided by 4 gave me 9.5. So I'm going to mark 9.5 at the hem here, plus my 2 inches seam allowance. Then I'm going to connect that to the knee area. Okay, so this is not long enough. Okay, so this is my front pattern. This is the front pattern now. Now remember that we always reduce the front, okay, by 1/2 inch or 1 inch. So I'm going to reduce the center front by 1 inch. Okay, then use my ruler to connect the front to, I use my ruler to connect it like so. Okay, so this is going to take care of whatever puffiness I'm going to have in front. So I can now go ahead and cut out my front pattern to be doing the alterations at the back. Okay, so I'll cut this when I'm done. Okay, if this is too deep, you can just use your hands to take it off like this. Okay, if you feel this is too deep. Alright guys, so it's time to work on the back. Okay, so this is my front pattern and I'll be using this pattern to draft the back. So what I'll do is to place the front pattern on this pattern paper. Okay, so you can go ahead and just pin it down. Okay, the side is the same for the front and the back. So I'm highlighting this so that you can see. The side is the same. Right, so the alteration is going to be towards the zip area. That's where you have the contour of the back. Okay, that's where we have the contour of the back butt. So all these alterations or the allocation will be towards the hip, towards the zip area. Okay, so remember that for my back skirt hip allocation, you divide the hip by 2, then add 1 inch. So the value I have is 23 inches. Okay, so we're going to divide 23 into 2, right? Because this is for the fabric is supposed to be on fold. Okay, and that's for the back. So 23 inches divided by 2 gives us 11.5. Okay, so it gives us 11.5. So I'm going to come here. Okay, so you know that this is the hip. Okay, this is the hip area. So I'm going to come here and mark 11.5. This is 11.5, right? At this area, this is 11.5 plus my 2 inches seam allowance. Okay, so remember for the front hip I had 10.5. Now for the back hip I have 11.5. So the difference is just about 1 inch. Okay, so I'm going to measure that again. You can see now for the front I had 10.5. Okay, so let's just leave this is the seam allowance of 2 inches, right? So here I have my 11.5 plus my 2 inches allowance. Okay, so you can see I have the extra 1 inch. You can see this is 1 inch, is the extra 1 inch. So I'm going to connect from the waist to the hip like so. Now this is like this because this daughter of Zion is not curvy. Like I don't have that sweet hip curve at the back, you know, that butt curve that suffocate them with a bum bum. Suffocate them with a bum bum. Please, this daughter of Zion does not have that. In fact, I was sleeping when God was creating it. So I'm going to now connect from, this is the hip, right? So you just connect from the hip back to the length. Okay, because this side is the same. The only difference is the hip area. Okay, that's the only difference. So this part is outward by 1 inch. You connect it to the waist and connect this back to the length. It's that easy, guys. There is nothing much of it to do here. It is that easy. Okay, so what you're going to do next is to add your zip allowance. Right now, if you're working with somebody that has so much hip and maybe the protrusion here is around 2 inches or even 3 inches. Okay, let's say you're working with somebody that the protrusion from the front is around 3 inches. This is 3 inches. You're going to connect this to this and to the length. Okay, we're going to see that this would be too much, so you're going to come and add a dart, okay, to the back. So you add 1 inch dart. That way you connect it like this, and the difference wouldn't be so much. When you take in your dart, everything will just, you know, be very sweet and very lush. I hope you get that. Okay, so that's just it for this hip allocation and dartless front skirt bodies. Okay, you can actually have a dartless back bodies like mine now. Because I'm following this curve, I'm not going to put any dart at the back. What am I darting again? There is no, the shape is not so much, so I'm not doing any dart. So what I'll do is to go and add my own zip allowance. Remember, this is just for if the person has a bigger butt protrusion. So my zip allowance of 2 inches. So from here, I'll add my zip allowance of 2 inches. So it connects like so. This is 2 inches. Then even to the length of the skirt, I'll add my 2 inches. So it's just going to follow the same curve. So your zip allowance is also going to be protruded. It's going to be curved like this. That way your back skirt is just going to be slopey like this and follow the shape of the bum, okay, or of the butt, right? So I'm using myself. I wish I was making this pattern for somebody that has a very big butt. You would have seen why we do the hip allocation. Okay, like I said, if this person's hip was around 46, all right, if the hip was around 46, you see that would have this protrusion like this. Okay, we're going to have this protrusion like this, and it's just going to curve and sit on the person's butt so well. Then what you do would be to add 1 inch for that, okay, so that it's not so the difference is not so much, okay. But you know that by the time you still sew in your dart, you would have exactly what you want. So this is my dartless skirt. For the front and the back, I have no dart at the back, okay, and I also have no dart in front. So this is just my skirt pattern. Very, very easy, detailed, and when you wear it, the fitting is amazing. Forget that this daughter of Zion does not have all these things. They won't matter in heaven. So you see, all these curves, they won't matter in heaven. So if you're like me and you don't be discouraged. Yeah. So I'll just go and, you know, cut out. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and, you know, notch my zip allowance. This is my zip allowance. Okay, so whatever notch, you're going to also introduce it to the back, to the fabric. Okay, so this is the back pattern. This is the back pattern. Right, so place my fabric on fold, and this is the back pattern. Okay, so I'll just go and cut it out. Back pattern. I'm going to just keep it for when I will be needing a pencil skirt again. Okay, so don't throw away your patterns. Make sure you keep them handy. Right, so this is my side seam and this is my zip allowance. Okay, you can see. So you can see that it has you can see the shape it has. So it's going to show my non-existent bum. Hey, all right, so I'll go ahead and use the front pattern to cut the front, but the front is going to be on fold. Okay, it can. So the front will be on fold. You have to make sure that this place is on fold. Okay, so we are still managing fabric. Remember that you have to take off this 1 inch like so. So I'm going to place it and make sure that it's on fold. Okay, you need to place it properly. I'll also go and use my pattern for future use. Okay, so this is the front pattern, like so. So what I will do, okay, is to go and attach my band. Okay, I'll go and cut out my band. I'll show you how to cut the band. I'll go and attach the band to this, also attach the band to this one separately. Okay, then after attaching the band, remember this is the zip side, so I'll just come to this part and sew using my my seam allowance. Okay, so I'll go and sew using 2 inches. Remember my side seam allowance is 2 inches, so I'll just go and place it like so and sew 2 inches downwards from top to bottom. Then I also come to this part, place it right sides fitting right sides. Okay, so you need to note which part is the upper part and the lower part. Then I also go and sew 2 inches downwards. Okay, then afterwards I'll then hold this like this. Okay, then sew my 2 inches. Okay, you might want to put your zip by the side or at the back, whichever one you want. Okay, so I'm just going to go and do those things and show you.